Good morning. Welcome to another edition of A Coffee With. Today I'm delighted to welcome Dasha Krivonos. She's the CEO of the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies, one of Europe's leading strategy and foresight institutions, supporting both companies and public organizations in navigating long-term trends and making robust decisions in an increasingly complex environment. And indeed, we are operating in a landscape shaped by geopolitical tensions, accelerating technology cycles, a more demanding sustainability agenda, and structural demographic shifts across Europe. These dynamics bring clear risks, but they also open strategic windows of opportunity for organizations and regions that move early and decisively. Together with Dasha, we will explore how organizations can build resilience in this age of structural change, how future thinking becomes an essential leadership tool, and what strategic capabilities will define competitiveness in the coming decade. The Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies has been instrumental in shaping the debate around megatrends such as geopolitical fragmentation, cognitive automation, demographic transformation, and Dasha's work combines analytical clarity with a yet pragmatic business-oriented perspective, helping leaders turn strategic uncertainty into actionable direction. Dasha, good morning.
Good morning.
It's a pleasure having you with us this morning here.
My pleasure.
So let's indeed, speaking about the future, an increasingly interesting concept in times of uncertainty, I would say. Let's start with the big picture, geopolitics. Often referred to when you look the years ahead. Which structural forces do you think or do you expect to shape the operating environment for companies and organizations alike in Europe?
Well, I think right now there's probably as many views on geopolitics as there are people interested in geopolitics. So I think my view is probably just one out of many, but I think what we really, and you and I spoke before this morning, there's some things that we need to divide things into what will stay the same, what is changing already, and what is it that is truly uncertain. And I think in many ways we tend to shuffle different dynamics between these three boxes just because we want to, just because we like it different. So the US-China rivalry is not going away. I mean, this is something that will remain. It is not an invention of the current administration. It is something that has been taking place over many administrations, is just now playing out in a different domain. So I think this world where we are decoupling from the dynamics and groupings of the last century has come to stay. This is not a temporary blip for the last 10 years, at least in Europe. We wanted to think that this is a temporary development, that this is something that Trump invented or populists or something else. I mean, this is something that's been a long time coming. So in many ways, and I'm borrowing this analogy from somebody else, but Europe is now finding itself in a very difficult triangle, the triangle of sadness, if you will. So we have the threat from the east, and this is not just Russia. I mean, recently Putin visited India. We, together with our transatlantic partners, we helped Mr. Modi into that club as well. So we pushed him closer to China. So we have a whole group of countries on the east that are not particularly a threat themselves, but they're supporting something that is. Then we have the disappointment from the south, which means everything we now call the global south, which is an interesting term because we used to call it developing countries, third world countries. Now it's a grand gesture saying now it's the global south, but fact is they have very little in common with each other. And there's this growing disappointment in everything that liberal democracy, market economics, free trade promised for 100 years and didn't deliver. And then last but not least, and I'm going to be blunt, I mean, the last part of the triangle is probably this madness from the West. Because we're not really sure what comes when, and depending on how many times a day you read the news, you're going to be equally surprised, right? So I think that has come to stay for a while at least, and if not, hopefully not the threat from the east from a military point of view, but the fact that the world does not see the things the way we do anymore is a fact. And the fact that some 85 countries of the world don't support Ukraine or don't really care, I mean, that has dawned on us. It took us a couple of years to realize it is not their problem. It is not top of mind, and they have issues of their own, but we've been expecting the world to respond. So I think for the next decade or two, we will be seeing this reshuffling continue. And question is, for me, the uncertainty is more, is it going to be peaceful? Because very few times in human history we've had superpowers switch places in terms of power balance and do it peacefully. And I don't mean trade friction, I mean like real conflict. We haven't seen that yet, luckily. And if anyone has read or at least looked through the national security strategy from last week from the US, is a very interesting document. And it no longer speaks of ideals and values. This is an industry policy-based paper. This is about geostrategic control. This is about pragmatism. This is about almost killing multilateralism, saying we need pragmatic peace deals here and there. So I think the world is changing back to some elements of the beginning of the last century. In terms of now, it's more, we're reshaping the blocks of power. And I think going forward, anyone who's doing business, especially with a European base, will have to try and navigate that somehow, because this is not going away. This is not a Trump invention. This is a long time coming. So,
and that would be indeed my next question. The reshuffling of power balances and Europe in the middle of this triangle of sadness, like you said. How can business leaders prioritize effectively under these situations of uncertainty without necessarily just slipping into a kind of like reactive mode, just reacting to recent events, like for instance the customs conflict that we had and so forth?
Well, I think, and as I start by saying, I think the key is, and this is where foresight is a wonderful tool, we have to remember not everything is important. And it may feel so because everything is on the move and everything is volatile, but not everything is important. So first of all, it's about deciding what is really going to have an impact on your business. And not just because it sounds important, it sounds nice or sensational. We have to check our biases. Is it just something you read in the news and it seems overwhelming, or is it something that is really going to impact you? The second thing is, again, go back to what will not change. What is non-negotiable? Where should you focus your energy as a leader, saying, okay, I need to navigate this, because we all have the saying, the world will never be the same. And well, the good news is in many ways it will be the same. So you have to establish what is not changing, what is changing already, and you have to stop pretending it's not, and what is truly uncertain. And when you're done doing that, you're going to realize that there's only a few things you actually have to watch. The rest of them you should start planning for. And that makes it a lot easier. So not everything is important at once, and not everything is uncertain. Some things we just don't like the direction of, and we want them to be an uncertainty, but they're not.
All right.
They're just unpleasant.
All right, good. That's already one good piece of advice. Don't mistake unpleasant events for uncertainty. And look at what's really changing and what's actually staying. Something that's definitely changing is the role of technology and AI, and it has been for many years. It continues to do so. So AI is now also some concept that is already embedded in business processes and structure. How do you see the role of business leadership in times of industrial automation, AI? How is AI gonna continue to reshape our way of how we do business?
Well, it seems like we're still in the early stages of implementation. So we spent, when ChatGPT hit the rest of us a couple of years ago, I mean, AI has been, I guess, in the science sphere for many decades, but for us it's only a couple of years old. We spent the first 6 months discussing whether it's going to kill us or whether it's going to solve everything, right? So we were moving between this utopia and dystopia. I think within the last year or so, we finally moved closer to exploring what it could actually do, how it would actually impact us. The jury is still out on what is going to be the long-term effect. I mean, and not me, but AI scientists, business leaders, everybody's still debating what is going to be the long-term effect. But and that also means that many companies went from pledging that we will never let go of our people as a competitive thing. You know, it was very touching, but it was also untrue, saying we will be human first always, and that's just until you're squeezed or you actually realize what the technology can do. In the other extreme, we had companies going AI first to an almost AI only, saying, you know what, we're going to do this only, and they're pulling back. So we're seeing several examples of companies coming back a little bit. So So in terms of and this is probably not going to be news to anyone, but we're looking at this hybrid intelligence now. Mm-hmm. Hybrid meaning, how do we incorporate humans and AI in the best possible ways? You may remember, you and I are almost the same age, I think. You may remember when Deep Blue beat Kasparov in 1997. We thought now chess is dead, but we realized that, I mean, if you combine humans and AI, we still get more fun, better chess sometimes. So I guess it's kind of the same. We're in the same place now. We're now realizing that hybrid intelligence is the way to go. The reason I mentioned that is because, first of all, I think the wave of AI only has not ended. I think more companies are going to go and try and come back a little bit. But it also means that we need to be leaders in a very different way. So we need to go from being the ones who have all the answers, which is very much something we associate with being leaders. You know, we somehow made it to whatever position we're in, and we equate our capability of having the answer to everything with being a good leader. Yeah. We need to be the best at asking questions and asking the right questions, and whether it's prompt engineering or whatever it is, and we need to be the ones who are able to make decisions beyond the data, because at some point the predictive models, that's all they are. They're predictive models, which means they're basing everything on the past. Mm-hmm. So I think it's about embracing the fact that we will have both. Yeah. And it's not, so far, I'm not sure AI is going to take jobs, but it's going to take away tasks. And how do you reshuffle tasks between humans, AI, and embed it as part of your employee group, if you will, right? So it may not necessarily take away a whole role, but it will take away parts of it.
So again, like our first debate about geopolitics, is about finding the right balance, so to say. But obviously, AI, digitization, has a link to geopolitics, the whole note of digital sovereignty, often being seen these days also as a tool for Europe to re-innovate itself in a way. What would be your take on digital sovereignty from a European perspective under the circumstances we were debating AI automation?
Well, I just looked at I think a data set that came out recently, and if you look at the top 10 S&P 500 companies, there's not much European tech on there. I don't think there's a single one. I think, and I'm being a little bit, it's early morning, so I'm being a little bit blunt, but I think we've talked a lot about the Draghi report. First of all, China has been very clear. For 10 years, they had Made in China 25. For 10 years, they've been telling us what they want to do in the high-tech sectors when we've ignored it. Again, in Europe, we really like the saying, you know, China imitates, US innovates, and we regulate. Maybe the last thing is the only thing that is true. And we've ignored all the signals that came out of China. So the fact that they had 5 million STEM graduates every year, we kind of, you know, there are 1 billion people, that's not too much. So we ignored it. And then finally came DeepSeek, and we've seen data that China is now leading in 60 out of 64 critical technologies, and the Draghi report comes, right? 700 pages, and we're now all, wow, we're no longer competitive. And I have to ask, why are we so surprised? And yet, since the Draghi report, which was a shock, it was a bit of a bomb in our own understanding as Europeans, nothing has happened. Virtually, we've done nothing. And I think that answers the question, maybe. So we talk about digital sovereignty. We talk about the Eurostack. We talk about needed competitiveness. Fact is, we're dependent on compute. We're dependent on chips. We're depending on AI models, the digital infrastructure. And now when we track these huge investments in AI, they're not coming out of Europe either. So I wish we were at a different place, but I think if you look at the baseline, that we're starting from very, very low base compared to China and the US, and the level to which they invest and we don't, we talk about it more than doing something. And the non-response to the Draghi report, I think, is a brutal wake-up call. That was the wake-up call, and then we pushed the snooze button and we started to talk about the report rather than do something.
Yeah, that's also something that we share in Germany as well as in Europe. We are good in analyzing our challenges and not so good in responding to what actually challenge there is. Another concept that has shaped the business agenda for many years and has been one of the main drivers from a European perspective has been sustainability. Sustainability, indeed, seeing the geopolitical landscape, seeing the topics that are currently arising, I would say is changing, but still will continue to be a defining driver of competitiveness also for the future. But how do you expect, under the circumstances we are discussing, the sustainability agenda to evolve over the coming years?
I think every CSR manager is asking themselves the same question right now. Where is this headed? Because there's no doubt we're now moving in a difference in a, if not 2, then a 3-speed world. We've seen the US pull back significantly from everything that had to do with sustainability. We saw the failure of the plastic summit or the plastic agreement. At the same time, we're seeing China move ahead very quickly in terms of renewable energy, electrification of everything. So I think in Europe, and this is where it becomes a little bit, if not emotional, then personal. I hope we'll hold on, but I think also we could see in the Draghi report that sustainability has taken second place. It's now a competitiveness driver, not a driver in itself. Meanwhile, we will see exposure to infrastructure. We're seeing extreme weather, and I know there's volatility, but we're seeing more and more European cities having to invest and prepare for weather changes, right? So I think it will remain a data issue. I think there will be some scale back in the reporting demands, because we can see that many companies are curbing under the pressure for reporting. But I think increasingly, as the energy consumption of, for instance, data centers, et cetera, increases, this is going to remain top of mind for the general public. And depending on what else comes, I mean, we can see now that in the WEF risk reports and all the other reports on risk, it's more about, for a while it was COVID, now it's war. So climate and sustainability keeps taking second place, and if that's how we vote, that's how politicians then govern, and then this is basically what's happened. But I think we're not the only ones who care about sustainability and the climate. I do think we have allies elsewhere in the world. It's just not the same allies as we used to have. And question is, will we be able to forge something together? Going back to the geopolitics bit, I think now everybody feels it's unnerving, right? So
Clear.
Everything is changing, but sometimes when the ice breaks, it also allows room for doing something different. I mean, for a long time, if we were subscribing to the Western alliance model, then there were things people or countries we could not deal with. There were ways in which we couldn't have conversations. Now we can. I think what we really try to emphasize in the Institute is that it's extremely important to remember that in every scenario, you will have winners and losers.
Yeah.
You will have an emotional response, which you should set aside right away. So it may feel uncomfortable, but in every scenario there will be opportunities. And I think the fact that we now have a geopolitical slush ice before it freezes back again, and it will, at some point it's going to settle and it's going to stay stable for a number of decades. This is also an opportunity to look for other cooperations, also in terms of climate, because yes, the US has turned its back on the agenda, but I mean as a whole, in terms of administration. But we still have other huge players who care about it, if not for ideological reasons, then because for reasons of competitiveness, health, well-being, and everything else.
And that would be my next question. We often have a debate that, for instance, sustainability agenda is being seen as a driver of competitiveness. Occasionally, it is being seen as a stumbling block to achieving more competitiveness. What would be your take on this discussion?
Well, I think long term, I mean, if we just pick one thing, for instance, energy, right? Energy is a big component. And I think now that AI also raises the bar for energy use significantly. I think the US now has, the data centers are currently 4 or 5% of their entire electricity consumption. When we move for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, they're going to be at 10, 11% of the entire electricity consumption. It raises the question on energy. And I think in that sense, I think the renewable agenda will remain an important source for solving this and everything else. I think in Europe we're well positioned to use it as a competitive, but I also think and this is going to sound harsh, but I also think we're kidding ourselves if we think we're the only green region. First of all, we're not very green when we look at our own emissions. We like to think so, but we're not. We know that. I mean, our tons per capita are quite high. We are being overtaken in terms of electrification push and electrification energy. We're being overtaken on renewable production and deployment. So
on battery vehicles,
exactly.
For instance.
Battery vehicles, sharing. We have a long way to go from ownership to access to assets, for instance, etc. So I think Europe is well positioned because we have a history of caring. We don't have much of a history of doing, but it means we're somehow primed to be able to do this. But I think if we're kidding ourselves if we think we're the green region. We talk about it a lot, but others are doing more than we are.
But so again, less analyzing, more doing.
A little bit.
Would be appropriate. Another topic. So we spoke about geopolitics, we spoke about the digital agenda, about sustainability, and obviously looking out there, I would assume the next topic to speak about is workforce, talent, the demographic pressure and change we are seeing specifically in Europe, aging populations, labor shortages, at the same time unemployment, shifting expectations around flexibility, well-being, and continuous upskilling. So how are these dynamics reshaping talent strategies, for instance, for companies? And yeah, what is your take on the concept of demographic change that we're actually witnessing?
Well, demographics are they're a very generous megatrend because it's one of the more stable ones in the sense that it moves slow and that's the interesting bit about wishful thinking, right? So even though demographics are relatively slow moving, we still seem to be surprised by the effects, which is, I mean, it's a bit of it's a curiosity, right? So we've seen decreasing birth rates in many countries, especially in the Northern Hemisphere. I think in Denmark we reached like 1.5 or 1.6 recently, and we need 2.1 or 2.2 children to replace society. Yeah. So we have that reality of shrinking populations, which have taken us by surprise. In all our macro models, we had 1.9. We built schools and daycares for children that are not coming. So that's the one thing. And it also means that, yes, the aging bit is going to, we'll discuss that separately, but I think the fact that we have these small cohorts and the fact that you're driving down the baseline, I know we're probably going to have to talk about immigration as well, and migration, because small countries like Denmark are not going to be able to replace their own populations. Then we have the aging bit, and that has been a long time coming, right? And I think my colleagues working in health, we do a lot in the future of health, they told me that the whole world is getting older, but it's a parallel shift. So the countries that used to be the oldest are still the oldest, but everyone is getting older. So it's a global challenge eventually. And then we have the I guess the traditional challenges that we're saying that we want to utilize talent for far longer, but we can see that we have this ageism, which means if we see a resume of an elderly applicant, we kind of tend to discard it. So there's still this cultural gap between the reality of the demographics and the culture that we have in our when we address the labor force. Then I think there's a huge question when it comes to demographics. If we just set aside the labor force element for a second, I mean, when it comes to demographics, it's crucial whether or not we're healthy when we're old. There's a very big difference between aging healthy and aging non-healthy. Huge for public spaces, for public budgets, for the health budgets, for everything else, right? And we're not discussing that very much. It's very funny because when we talk about aging, we talk about the burden on the younger generations to finance this. We do have underfunded pension systems, some places in Europe, and then we talk about the fact that we need to extend the pension age. But we don't talk about health very much when it comes to aging. And there's a tremendous difference. If we invest in preventive care, if people stay healthier longer, it may not be such an issue. They will be active, participating, healthy citizens for a long time, and society will adjust. If they're not healthy, if right now, I think my colleagues tend to say that we usually come to the healthcare sector when we're 90% dead. So the last 3-4 months are the most expensive months of your life because we're still shy away from using data technology. And there's so much, I mean, we're all wearing stuff now that tells us something about our health, right? There's so much data collected, especially in the Nordics, that there's a lot we could do in predictive preventive health, ensuring that this aging population is just getting older, not necessarily a burden to society. When it comes to how do we do, I mean, the fact that when you and I went to university, and again, I'm bringing on my bandwagon, I think we were basically told that you have 5 years to collect a suitcase that you're going to use for the rest of your life, and you're going to travel the world, and you don't know where you're going to go, what the weather will be like, what are you going to do when you're there, but here's your suitcase for the rest of your life. That's how we build skills, right? So when we talk about lifelong learning, this is basically saying, pack a small bag, and then you'll be able to get things as you need them along the way. I mean, it's an amazing idea. I would prefer that, because I don't know about you, I hate packing even for a weekend, and then they tell you now you need to pack for 60 years, and you can't add anything, and if you can, it's going to be a little bit like
specifically in times of
maybe you can do laundry
changes that we are
exactly
that we're actually seeing.
So you and I were basically told you pack, and then maybe you get to do laundry on the way, and that's kind of, you can refresh it, but you can't really get new stuff. And this way, I think what all employers should do, and that goes for myself, I don't live it yet, but I intend to, is really treat, because we maintain machinery, right? If you have a factory, you're going to maintain machinery. Sometimes you halt production for a week and you go through every single bolt. But with people, we go like, oh, training, you can have that as a bonus this year. Like we treat upskilling as a perk, which is completely ridiculous, because we just established that everything is changing and knowledge is not static. So I think the sooner we embrace the upskilling as a part of a natural cycle, give people a week off to do it, sponsor it. I mean, think about like the screws and the bolts in a factory. You would not leave them and say, oh, you lucky screw, you get a little bit of oil this year. So somewhere between those, and I think, but we're all waking up to that, especially in the Nordics, the way we work. There's room for taking a gap year, or especially because our life phases are different. When you're young, you're ambitious, you can work till you drop, basically, not that you should. Then you have children, and you should be able to scale down because your life is different. Your mental capacity is different. Sure. And then at some point, your kids are all right, and you have so many years where you can give back again. So we should be able to give this flexibility without treating it as this huge negotiation where someone is we're doing them a favor. I mean, we're doing ourselves a favor. Lives change, life phases change, and I think we're embracing that. It's not that difficult. It really isn't. It's a mindset change. So it's.
Interesting, because it actually shows, and also you mentioned it, that demographics and demographic change, also the whole debate about upskilling and so forth, this is very easy to foresee in a way, because it follows arithmetic functions. But still, we do so hard, or we feel so hard to actually adapt to these kind of changes and react or plan these kind of changes, which are not so volatile, but more plannable, I would say. One mentioning on migration, and you quickly hit it on it. And obviously we need migration to sustain our workforces, to continue to be innovative and so forth. However, we also live in societies that are critical on migration. How do we go about this, and what are we going to see in the next few years to come?
I wish I had an answer. If I did, I'd maybe be doing something else. But I think that the mathematics of it, you said, I think somehow, if we could drive the public narrative towards the math and say, if we don't, we will diminish in size. When we see these numbers, and you can see the Danish newspapers, when we look at these numbers on birth rates, it doesn't say, guys, we will need labor. It basically says, oh my God, we're going to be overtaken by another group of population. So we don't focus on the actual problem, which means we need people to come here to help us. We're focusing on the fact that we'll become a minority. It becomes a very ideology, values-based discussion, that we're going to be overtaken by people from emotional discussion. Again. So we kind of very quickly we let go of the math, saying we need this labor, and we don't discuss how to get the labor. We start discussing how do we get rid of these foreigners, which makes no sense. I mean, because mathematically that takes us back to zero. Like everybody else, I don't have a solution, but I do think giving it a different narrative. I think focusing on some of the more positive data. I don't say we should shy away from mentioning the issues, because we have neighboring countries who've done that in a different way for a long time and now are seeing the difficulties related to that. But I do think that focusing on the negative side only, I think it may drive away the labor that we need. There's also huge untapped potential in a whole group of people who come here they're called the love pets. I learned that word, which is basically people who come here for a spouse. But very often we don't pick them up in terms of the talent that they have. It usually comes with hurdles. Very little is done for the spouses, but there's usually a huge, well-educated talent pool. We never talk about those. So the love pets, I think, harbor a lot of talent.
Interesting concept. Never heard about.
I didn't invent it. It's basically people saying, I'm not here for your welfare system. I'm not here for a job. I'm here because I love someone from your country. I think we, as
So
society,
I'm available
yes, exactly.
in case you need
And the
me.
Nordics, I mean, it's cold and dark. Of course, we'll go home when we close in. That's a cultural thing, but I do think it's difficult as a foreigner to penetrate this.
Yeah, interesting. And last question, and we're slowly running out of time, but maybe just a word. What would be, we now discussed 4 topics. There's more, obviously. We didn't have time to touch them. But what would be your piece of advice to companies, to business leaders, to strengthen their strategic resilience under the circumstances we are living in, we have just been discussing?
I think check your biases. Stop confusing the likable for the likely. At the level of decision making, we cannot afford to be driven by emotions. Stop thinking that numbers are the answer to everything. The models are breaking down because relationships in the models are breaking down. Every number about the future is a quantification of future beliefs. There is no data about the future, not a single data point. Remember that. We want numbers. I love numbers. I'm an economist. They're not true. So start the conversation with what needs to be true. What do you believe about the future world for this to be the right number? So I think start with the biases, use foresight as a tool, and not everything is uncertain. Some things remain, some things are already changing, and very few things are uncertain. So put them in the right categories and then act accordingly. That will take away a whole burden of thinking everything is moving, because it's not.
Dasha, thank you so much.
Thank you for coffee.
Sharing your insights and for your time this morning. I think indeed, and your last piece of advice sounds very interesting. Your perspective highlight how essential it is for leaders to not only be observers of trends and to be emotionally attached to some of the consequences of these trends, but to actively integrate into strategic planning. And indeed an age of accelerative change, competitive advantage increasingly comes from clarity, preparedness, and the ability to shape rather than to react to the future. So thanks again, Dasha, for your time this morning. And to all of you, thank you for being part of A Coffee With this morning. We look forward to welcoming you soon again for another conversation on innovation, leadership, and sustainable growth. And this will be on the 14th of January, where I will be speaking with Dietmar Barrow from Danfoss about the decarbonization of the healthcare sector, specifically hospitals. Until then, I would say God Jul, frohe Weihnachten, wishing you a Merry Christmas, hopefully some time off to reflect and to reload your batteries together with your loved ones. Thank you so much.